Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you can hear me. Just on my microphone and my camera on. If you could let me know in the chat if you can hear me loudly and clearly, please. That'd be great. That's brilliant. Thank you. Great. So thank you very much for joining me today. And I'm just going to be running through a bunch of different areas or key areas for small businesses in regards to cybersecurity. But before we begin, I kind of want to give you a bit more of a picture about myself and who I am. So my name is Umar Javed, and I'm actually, screen's not working. Originally from the Midlands, but I've been in Watford for the last 7 or so years. Father of two demonic slash angelic boys, which keep me busy most of my time whilst I'm, diving in and out of cybersecurity incidents. I've worked in the legal sector, e-commerce more recently. I've also worked in law enforcement, and I've also come off an engagement with a defense agency based in Europe. So you're probably going to gather throughout the course of this session that I'm extremely passionate about what I do. I love tech, I'm a geek, and I like to kind of get my hands dirty with all sorts of things. So at the end, when we do have time for like questions and answers, but by all means, please feel free to ask away. And if I can ask you just to kind of post any kind of questions you have, and we'll cover those at the end of the session. So in terms of today, I'm going to be covering what cybersecurity is and how does that fit into your business. I think it's a kind of common issue that some organizations have, is that they don't fully understand how cybersecurity actually fits in to what they do. But as we start using technology, it becomes pretty much everything that we do, because from coming home and turning your central heating on to enabling it through Nest or your Amazon Echo, all these things are kind of interconnected. You can have a part to play not only on your business but on your day-to-day life as well. And then from there we'll go on to common cyber threats. So you hear about all sorts of hacks and malware, all these kind of things, and I'll kind of try to get rid of the air of mystery in terms of what they actually mean. How to protect your business. I think it's a very hard question for most people that don't work in the same domain as myself, in terms of what can they do? And it's not really clear, and it can be very, very confusing and very technical, but I hope to kind of, allay those concerns and make it a bit more easier for you to digest and see what's out there to protect your business. And finally, I'll go through a few free resources that are available that you can start kicking off today. They're fairly simple, fairly trivial to kind of set up, but they're going to set you up for like a really good start in terms of your cybersecurity journey for your organization. And as I mentioned, if I don't continue waffling on for too long and we do have a bit of time at the end, by all means, feel free to ask questions, and then we'll go from there, really. Fantastic. So when we're talking about cybersecurity, you have this picture of like hacks and all this kind of incidents taking place with large organizations. But to start with, we have to kind of understand what cybersecurity is, right? Because that makes our lives a lot more easier. We can kind of see how that fits into our day to day. So what we've done here is we've broken up cyber and cybersecurity into two parts. The first part, cyber, as you get a feel for, this Cyberman from Doctor Who on the left of the screen here. We're talking about computers, we're talking about technology and how it's interconnected. In our, in modern times, we have the internet, which facilitates a lot of our communications, whether it's data that we're sending via email or data that we're receiving through packages and online sources for downloading documents and so on. But when we talk about security, which sounds like a common thing, right? Everyone knows what security means. But in the context of cybersecurity, we're talking about like protecting, we're talking about defending our networks. We're looking at how can we monitor if someone has actually compromised our network. We probably wouldn't know in most cases, right? We're also looking at the preventative controls that we can put in place, but also how do we respond to these? Because, if a cybersecurity incident happens, it's happening. You might get an email from a bad guy or a bad woman or a bad person, whatever you want to call it, telling you, hey, I've hacked into your systems. What do you do next? I think that could be very, very concerning. But in a nutshell, when we talk about cybersecurity, we're talking about protecting computers, devices such as your laptops, your iPads, even things such as your phone, which are vital to most organizations and people, and as well as data as well, from unauthorized access, damage, and destruction. So when we look at the recent events that have taken place, so of the last week or so, we had the Manchester United cybersecurity incident. We've had EasyJet get hacked and having to pay a massive fine, just like British Airways. We've got all this kind of news on the public domain about, the US US elections being interfered by nation states and so on. We've got local councils such as Redcar recently and Hackney Council, which were affected by a cyber attack. But when we think about it, what's the common factor in all of these? Well, they're pretty large organizations, firstly. They've got a lot of people, they're well established. Some of them are, close to almost 100 years old, if not more. So when I used to work at City London Corporation, that organization, the square mile of London, I think it's close to 800 years old. So they're very well established. But then, as coming back onto this point in terms of the factors, when we look at what time is available to them, they've got a lot of time to react to these types of situations. They can buffer themselves. They've got a lot of money. They can pull in security teams. They can pull in contractors. They can even tap into private organizations that specialize in incident response, and they can bring them in. And lastly, they have resource. Now, the interesting thing about this is that in most large organizations will have a security operations function. I've worked in many before. They do things in a variety of different ways, and they're constantly monitoring what's actually happening. And if there's the smallest hint of some kind of malicious activity happening, something that you don't want on your network, or someone's trying to attack you or your website or your systems, you'll get an alert and you respond to it. Now, the uncommon or inconvenient truth is that small businesses rarely have these three. They don't have the time, they don't have the money, or they don't have the resource. So if you're a small accountancy with like 5 people, money might not be an issue, or it may be an issue. Time might be critical because you're dealing with matters on a day-to-day basis. But resource, you're not really going to have a cybersecurity function. You may have awareness, but you probably want to have a cybersecurity function that's set up for 24/7 to provide a range of different cybersecurity capabilities. And this is a real concern for me, because you hear about this in the news, that these large organizations, such as the examples I provided, are getting hit by all sorts of cyber attacks. But what about the majority of the smaller organizations such as mine, such as yours, that may be impacted by a variety of cyber attacks? In some cases, the impacts can be terminal. So COVID has shown us this year that a lot of organizations have been hit quite hard financially, whether they've been able to trade or not. And if you're down on your luck and your business isn't doing well, and it's come out of lockdown and it's kind of starting to build momentum back up again, that's possibly the worst time to get hit by a cyber attack, which could completely total your organization. Now, when we come down to the question, what does this mean to your business? It means a lot. And the objective of this session is not to create any kind of state of fear. What we're trying to do is just try to address the types of impact that they could have to your business. So I've got reputational damage here. So if you're a local baker, or you're an accountancy or a law firm or a designer or an artist, your reputation is probably the most important thing. You probably get a lot of business based on your reputation, word of mouth. If that gets damaged through some cyber attack, that can be detrimental to your business. As I mentioned with COVID, financially, organizations have been really suffering. But cyber attacks can result in organizations having to let go of staff. In addition to that as well, prosecution. I'll come on to this in just a second, actually. I'll explain exactly what I mean by that. Potential fines. So the large organizations such as EasyJet, which are hit by a cyber attack, there's a data breach. They possibly didn't do enough to protect customer data. And then when it comes down to it, when the regulators come in, they get a hefty fine, often millions and millions of pounds. Financial losses. If you're an e-commerce company or you rely heavily on technology, if that technology becomes unavailable, you cease to trade, you cease to generate income and revenue. So it's very, very important to kind of keep an eye on these things and understand what are your crown jewel assets within your organization that you need to protect. This kind of ties in very well with reputational damage. So when we're looking at loss of trust, confidence in your business, it's very hard to recover from these things. People have put their confidence and trust in you to store their information. And if you aren't doing enough to protect that information and it becomes available or exposed to the public domain, it's very hard to kind of build that customer base back up again, even more so for smaller organizations. A few years back, you may recall, the telecoms provider TalkTalk had a cybersecurity incident where a bunch of kids basically exposed a lot of customer data and took it out of their systems. And it kind of showed that large organizations, they're not complacent. They put a lot of effort and time into it, but there's always an opportunity to break into even the best of systems. And, they're very lucky to have recovered from that particular incident. And actually, they're probably doing better than they did before. And there was a massive recruitment drive to build up the cybersecurity function after that. They're lucky, they're a large organization, but the same cannot be said for smaller organizations. And when we look at higher recovery costs to rebuild or replace, it's like black and white, really. Large organizations, they have computers that can be built and processed and kind of replaced as soon as they want, really. But small organizations, they may not be able to get computers. They might have to pop to PC World or somewhere to get a computer. And it might not be practical for them because it might be too exorbitant in terms of the cost associated with that as well. Loss of trading customers. That's basically it. I can't say much more than that, really. If you lose trade, you lose customers. It's very hard to build those leads up and get them engaged with your business. And I think usually when trust is lost, it's very, very hard to get it back. You have to kind of overextend and really give them the assurances. And sadly, some businesses do fail. You know, I was dealing with an incident recently where an accountant who ran a family business was hit by ransomware, locked out all their computers, um, and they didn't take any backups. They were really good about kind of using computers and having some hard copy records, but then it really affected them. They were out for like 3 weeks. They literally had nothing could be done. They literally had to get new computers and build their entire network. It cost like about £3,000. £3,000 they couldn't really lose during this particular COVID pandemic, but they had to, and they were lucky they survived. But other organizations that of similar size and stature have been completely wiped out. They just don't have the money. So when we continue and discuss the stats, they're quite damning, really, and they're quite frightening. But as I mentioned earlier, the objective is not to scare you; it's just to kind of highlight how prolific this is. When we look at cybersecurity, as I mentioned earlier, we kind of talk about the large organizations, but there's a lot of stuff happening that's so passive that you probably wouldn't even think twice about it, right? So looking at the stats here, 9 out of 10 UK companies have suffered breaches in the last 12 months. And the scary thing about that, without trying to make it too scary, some companies don't even know they've been breached. So you could get an attacker sitting on their networks for absolutely ages, trying to gather a picture of who they are, maybe looking for sensitive information. They just don't know about it. And like one small business in the UK is successfully hacked every 19 seconds. So within a minute, you've potentially got 3 companies that have been hacked. 1 in 3 UK organizations say that they've lost customers after a data breach. Touching back on my previous point, customers are pretty much the lifeblood of your business. And trying to retain them during a pandemic, and if you get hit by a cyber attack, is absolutely essential. Being able to respond and assure customers that they can trust you with their data is absolutely paramount in today's age. And like almost 4 out of 10 lost business because of security issues. It kind of relates to 1 in 3 UK organizations losing their customers. If we start losing business, it's very hard to kind of get that back in on a very, very tough market across all industries at the moment. And this is probably one of the most shocking things. Almost 5 in 10, 50% of UK organizations are hit by ransomware in the last year. Ransomware is really, really nasty. And I'll cover some other bits as part of this webinar to kind of explain to you what kind of things you can put in place to prevent these kind of things from impacting you. So can we do anything about this? Because it seems like it's all doom and gloom, right? The reality is, yes, we can. We can do a lot about it. And when we kind of consider how we're going to tackle this particular challenge, it's first important to address what we're talking about in terms of the common terminology. So when we look at threats, we're looking at anything that can exploit a vulnerability intentionally or accidentally and obtain damage or destroy an asset. And when we talk about threat actors, we're talking about the bad guys, to put it simply. But one thing I would caveat that with is when you're talking about a threat actor, sometimes people within your organization, employees, do stuff accidentally. They're not a threat actor. Sometimes mistakes happen. We're only human. Now, when we're kind of talking about threats, we're looking at internal threats and external threats, the first of which I'll touch upon. So I think the common misconception is that, when a cyber attack happens, it's from the outside. Someone's attacking you. It can also happen from the inside. And I've seen this myself. In terms of some of the internal threats that we've got here, we've got accidents, I just touched upon. Things do happen. Humans are fallible. We do make mistakes. People could misconfigure servers, not realize they haven't installed antivirus on them, or they've exposed them to the internet without realizing. Sabotage. People could go into your business, break some computer system, which is absolutely essential to your business, deliberately to cause your business damage. Theft is quite a big one. Negligence, people just grow tired, they don't follow process, and they do some silly things which kind of result in cyber incidents or cyber attacks actually happening. And unauthorized access as well. So some examples that I've got here are for an accident. I'm going to touch on some of them. I won't bore you to death with all of them. An accident. How many times have you sent an email to the wrong recipient? I know I've done it, but imagine if that email contains something so sensitive for a deal. It could be, tens of thousands of pounds. It could be £1 million deal for a large organization. It doesn't necessarily matter, but there could even be sensitive information. These things do happen, and we hear about them in the news. I think about in 2008, the HMRC lost a disk of taxpayer details, and I remember that time I worked for a company that was working with the HMRC. Literally, everyone is asked to kind of look around to see if those disks have turned up. These things do happen. Sabotage is quite a big one. Given the COVID situation, unfortunately, a lot of people have been let go or they've been furloughed. And some people obviously aren't happy with that. And some people that have got access to systems are misusing them and breaking things and causing their previous employer a lot of issues. And unfortunately, these things do happen when people are in privileged positions. Unauthorized access is quite an important one because you would think it wouldn't happen. But let's say I work for your company, I manage the IT, and I don't like the way you've spoken to me or done something. I could be installing whatever I wanted to on your machines. I could be installing a keylogger, recording all your passwords and all your sensitive information. I could be doing anything. And sometimes people do misuse the privileges that are provided to them, and it's not uncommon. And kind of the second part to this is kind of the external threats, which are the ones that we kind of think about generally as part of like cyber attacks and so on. So interestingly, you get competitors, you've got malicious software, also known as malware. You've probably heard of that quite a lot. You've got the traditional hackers, which have a multitude of different personas. You've got sabotage again, which is an interesting one, social engineering, and criminals. So I'm going to touch on a few of these, just like before as well. Competitors, it's quite a big thing actually. I think it's more so common in larger organizations where they're constantly rapidly developing new processes or technologies or products, and the intellectual property has value. In some cases, millions of pounds of value. So let me think of one example here. So there was one company that was developing a new type of software that enabled schools to kind of securely share information during the COVID situation. They kind of tapped into the market at the right time. A lot of kids are being sent home. And there was another company that wasn't doing so well. And they obviously had an inside guy that kind of knew what was happening. So it kind of touches into a bit of the social engineering and sabotage element. And they basically got all the ideas. The guy was even sending them source code as well. So they literally built something to market, got it to market before the original company. It had a detrimental impact on them because they'd spent so many tens of thousands of pounds, in fact, in terms of getting contractors in to kind of build this tool. And unfortunately, it just didn't work out and they'd stolen their idea. And that purely turned out to be an insider threat, but it had external consequences in this case here, where a competitor and an insider, a person that was a trusted resource, exploited that relationship. If we move on to malicious software, you hear about, viruses, worms, ransomware. This is quite prolific at the moment. Looking at the stats that we talked about previously, I think there's about 50% of organizations in the last year have been hit by ransomware. And ransomware is a really, really big problem. So to touch on that very quickly, ransomware is a piece of software that infects your computers and your network, and it spreads and it locks everything down. It encrypts all your information. And in most cases, it says, hey, we've encrypted all your data and information. Send us a ton of money through some cryptocurrency, and then we'll give you the key to unlock it. And the issue with that is that, one, there's no guarantee they're ever going to unlock your information. Two, small companies, as I mentioned earlier, probably don't have the money, time, or resource to kind of really pay a lot of money and kind of get back to an operational state. And thirdly, which is one point I kind of jumped over, was prosecution. Some of these gangs could be part of a terrorist organization or organized crime gang. And by actually paying the ransom, you could be contributing to that. And you could fall under legal implications as a result of that. So it's very, very important to kind of seek advice from external parties. Do not be afraid to ask. And I think that's a really, really important thing. And one thing I'm going to really cover is social engineering. That sounds really exciting because it is. And with social engineering, what we're doing is we're tapping into the human, we're hacking the human, basically. So one example is this is something that happened at a conference. a journalist came up to these hackers and was like, hack me basically. And they're like, I'm not going to give you any information. They did a bunch of research online. They had his business card. They knew his telephone number, and they kind of had a rough indication of where he lived. So what they did was they got onto YouTube. They found a long video of a baby crying in the background. And one of the ladies called up his mobile phone company and was like, hey, with the baby crying in the background, I really need to reset my password. I can't remember what it is. I'm not the key account holder. I can't get a hold of my husband. I really, really need to do this. And they had the baby playing in the background. And unfortunately, in that case there, the customer services person fell for it. They're like, there's a baby crying. There's a bit of urgency in that whole situation. And they ended up just resetting that person's details. And within minutes, that lady had access to the guy's account. She could change his bank details. She could order phones. She could do a lot of destructive damage. So being able to kind of be aware of these types of threats is super, super important. Um, myself, I've gone onto sites, I've worn a yellow vest, and you'd be surprised how many places you can get into just wearing a yellow vest and having a clipboard. And it's a great experience to kind of show to clients and customers that actually, it's actually quite trivial. You can spend millions of pounds. It doesn't really matter. Someone could just walk into your business, plug in a USB key, infect your network, or put something in place that will steal your data. So these sound like something out of a spy novel, but these things are happening day to day, unfortunately. So we have to be very, very careful about that. So what does bad look like? So I've talked about, the various types of threat actors, the types of situations and the impact it could have to your business. But, what does bad look like? What's the real world consequence of this? So we've got Donald Trump's website here. Someone defaced it to make it look like the Department of Justice, and I believe the FBI, I think it is, had seized the site, which is a common page they put up when they seize really, really dodgy sites selling drugs and weapons and so on and so forth. And they're basically just taking the nick out of Trump there. So defacement is a really big thing, can have a really big impact on your brand and your reputation. And it's something that is really, really embarrassing. And it does happen quite a lot. It can take your site down. They can do something called a DDoS attack, or distributed denial of service, where they literally have these zombie computers all over the world hitting your site at the same time, and your website can't handle it, and it just collapses. So you'll get like an error page like this. You might have seen this. And you probably will see this in the next couple of weeks when you're doing your Black Friday or Cyber Monday shopping online. You'll be put into a queue, and that queue acts as a buffer. It's a mitigation to prevent the site from falling over. So they only let a certain amount of people or traffic into the site to stop it from falling over. Back in the day, maybe 5 years ago, sites would have gone down, and that's not beneficial for anyone. One, the customer has a terrible experience, and two, the company that's selling products can't trade online. Stealing and selling of your passwords. So in this example here, my company's done some investigation, and this client that we were speaking to at the time was like, "Hey, we've never experienced a data breach. We're like all good to go. We're making millions of pounds. We're doing so well." But then, like within minutes, we tapped into a dark web database and found a ton of passwords. And actually, some of them were for old employees, fair enough, but about 3 of them were for like execs, and we were able to log into their email. Send a few emails. Obviously, we had approval to do this beforehand. Please don't try this at home. Disclaimer. And that shows that actually you think everything's fine, but sometimes it can't. It may not be. So you have to kind of have an open mind and kind of think from a security first perspective. Send you phishing emails. If we all don't know what phishing is, it's where you get like an email which purports to be John Smith or Donald Trump in this case, which is inciting or enticing you to click on a link. And that link might go to a dodgy website where it might infect your computer, and it's a mechanism to try to compromise you. So in this example here, we've got President Trump. He's emailed me saying, "Hi Umar, don't listen to all the haters. I actually won like I said I would. Why don't you come and work for me?" I think I might do. It depends on how much money I get. But this shows you that it's possible to do these things. And later on, I'll cover something that you can put up pretty much today. If you wanted to, it's free. That will prevent these kind of spoofing or phishing type attempts from actually happening. And they can also infect your computers and network. So all the things I talked about, like, ransomware, spyware, and adware, all those different types of malware can really have a massive impact on you. And some of the recent types of malicious software malware that's come out can even survive having, if you've reset everything. So once you've built a new machine, you think it's perfectly fine, or the same machine that you're working on, it can still come back up again and reinfect you and your colleagues across the entire network. So the threat is real, does happen, has real world implications. Now, in terms of what we can kind of do to protect your business, we have to take a risk managed approach. So what I've outlined here is a three-stage process. So it's planning, implementation, and reviewing. So when we're talking about planning, we're thinking ahead. We're kind of thinking to ourselves, what are the types of information assets or anything that is critical to our business? It could be your file ledgers. It could be your list of your customers. It could be a list of the customers' orders, or anything that has, or you do not want to be out in the public, that has an impact. If you were to lose it, God forbid, if your business was to burn down tomorrow and you just had everything as a hard copy, that probably have a massive impact, right? So we have to kind of have that visibility in our minds in terms of, if we lost those assets, what impact would it have on us? Quite massive in most cases. Now, if we look at option 2, what kinds of risks could they be exposed to? So, as I mentioned earlier, if you've got a filing cabinet with stuff inside, if it's not locked, if someone walks into your office, they could just dive in and pull stuff out. You guys are out to lunch. Or if you don't have enough adequate security controls, like locks and alarms and cameras in place, someone could technically break into your building, because there's always going to be something there that holds value. It might not mean nothing to them, but they may sell it. But to you, it might have a massive amount of value. 3, what are the legal compliance requirements that your business is subject to? So we've got the Data Protection Act, we've got GDPR, which came in a few years back. So citizens, or data subjects as we call them, people that we store information about or data about, have a few rights in terms of what you can and what you can't do with their data. And if that data gets lost, like in the examples I mentioned earlier with like British Airways and EasyJet, the implications are you might get fined, which has a financial impact on your organization. And as I mentioned earlier, for small organizations, it can be really, really bad. Number 4, how would you continue to do business if you were attacked? So this is about thinking, if I was not able to trade right now, what is my backup strategy? Do I have another location I can operate from if you trade purely in physical products, like you're a manufacturer? Do you have a fallback solution? Do you have backups? Do you have a company you can rely on to help you? Number 5, how are you going to manage these risks on an ongoing basis? It's no good just writing down what the risks are and what you're going to do with them. You kind of have to take a wide view and kind of think, how might those risks change? So if you start buying more land or more properties, or you acquire another company, or you start selling a different type of product, or if you start all of a sudden going from a bricks and mortar store and start selling online, your risk profile has changed. So you have to kind of do this on an ongoing basis, and it's really important to kind of define this from the outset. The next stage is around implementing. So putting things into practice. You've discussed, we've kind of covered off, what are the risks? What do we need to protect? What would we do in that kind of situation? This is about putting some kind of controls in place. So if we put it into the context of a physical building, when you buy a house, probably one of the first things you should do is probably change the cylinder on your lock, so you have a new set of keys that no one else can use, right? So that's a control. That's a mechanism to prevent something from happening. So we have a variety of different controls we can put in place. You can put in, antivirus software on your computers. You can put in cameras. You can put in alarms. Whatever you need to try to protect that environment. And in some cases, smaller companies tend to not deal with IT themselves. They kind of outsource it to another company. So we have to kind of think about, if we're doing something, how can the IT company, whether it's outsourced, whether it's a couple of guys that come in every week to look after your IT, can actually manage and deliver this solution, these controls that we want to put in place. Number 2, do your staff know what their responsibilities are? Ask yourself, if you were to experience a cyber attack today, what would you and your staff do? If they see a malicious email or something dodgy, do they just click on the link, or do they just delete it? Or do they shout about it and say, hey, actually, boss, something doesn't look right here. We need to do something about it. Security awareness is absolutely essential. Security starts at the bottom, right? And you have to have a holistic view of security across your organization. So it doesn't really matter if you've got an intern in who's logging into the computers, or a C-level exec, or a managing director like myself. Everyone should have awareness of cybersecurity, even at a very basic level, so they understand what the risks might be. Number 3, if you're attacked or something goes wrong, how will you deal with it? And how will you get your business operational again? who will you turn to for help? It's like Ghostbusters, you know, who are you going to call? You're going to call Ghostbusters. This kind of situation, it's very confusing. I touched on this right at the beginning. A lot of companies aren't sure what to do. They'll usually tap on someone's shoulder in an IT company and say, hey, guys, can you help us out? And then sometimes they can, which is great. But then if you're a bit of a larger organization with multiple business units, it can completely shut you down. And it's not like you can just call the police up and say, hey, guys, someone's kicking in my door, where someone's going to respond. Cybersecurity incidents require a certain type of technical skill, a certain type of mentality and approach to be able to stop the spread of it. So, you know, as I mentioned earlier, in terms of security awareness, if you know something bad's happening and you were to kind of start your incident response process, you could contain it to stop it from spreading like a fire within your organization and spreading to other parts. And reviewing. So as I said earlier, it's an iterative process. As we kind of identify the types of risks your business is going to face, you have to kind of assess them. Changes will happen in your business. You know, people might come in, go out. You might hire more people. You have to constantly review and see if those controls are effective. So I kind of mentioned earlier, we have a house with a cylinder lock on the front. We have cameras, we have alarms. Are they still fit for purpose? So let's say, for example, if I took all of the fencing out from my garden, and got rid of it and left it there, that's another way someone could potentially get into my house. So I need to kind of assess that risk. Do I need to put floodlight cameras outside? Possibly. I would think that would be a pragmatic approach. Secondly, are we monitoring and acting on the information you receive from your controls? So for example, if you have a camera or you have a piece of software on your computer looking at malware, if it's constantly alerting and telling you that someone's been walking around at 3 o'clock in the morning, what are you going to do about it? You have to do something about it. There's no point investing a lot of money or hardly any money using free and open source software if you're not doing something with it. That would be an own goal. If something did happen, you've had all the indications about it and not done anything about it. And thirdly, do you know what the latest threats are? You don't need to know about what's happening to the local council, in the example that I presented earlier, or what's happening to British Airways. Think about yourself. Think about, if you work in a particular industry, what types of threats are likely to affect your organization? What type of cyber attacks are you going to have if you have a website, or if you connect to a remote location, or if people take laptops home? Those are all avenues for someone to compromise the laptops in your business. They could put malware on them. They could infect them with all sorts of bad things, which when they bring back to your base, to your office, when we return to some level of normality, can be like a ticking bomb. So we have to kind of keep an eye on these things and take a broad approach. So these are kind of some of the things that I've kind of covered today that I think you can start doing right away, which will have an immense impact. I say immense because if you're not doing anything at the moment and you are doing something later on today, that's a massive leap, because, you know, a lot of these threats or incidents arise from very unsophisticated attacks. They're usually quite easy to break into systems. I've had some systems where, you know, I've been given the assurance that, you know, oh, we've got the latest software, we've got like the latest endpoint detection and response, which kind of looks for odd behaviors. You can't break into the system. We'd pick it up before you even logged in. And some of the stuff is so trivial and quite embarrassing for the customers. But the goal is not to embarrass people, it's to help everyone to kind of operate more securely. So some of the things I'm going to be touching on here, I'm actually going to run through all of them. I think they're all relevant. Back up your data regularly, make sure it's accessible when you need it. You know, how many of you have lost a phone and you're like, oh, I wish I had a backup of everything? It's fundamental, right? Data is probably the lifeblood of your business, but it's customer data, contacts. If you lost that, how would you contact customers? So having a backup, whether it's in Google Cloud or something of that kind, is so important. And nowadays, it's relatively cheap to do that. So I think if you're not doing that already, consider what information you need to store, where you're going to store it, and how quickly you can get access to it if you lost your primary source. Install anti-malware software, antivirus software, fundamental stuff, right? Really basic. If you're not doing this at the moment, do it as soon as you possibly can. A lot of the software out there today is really good, and it's quite affordable. You know, you could spend maybe £10 a month per user. It doesn't have to be extremely expensive, but it does give you the latest virus updates. So if something's affected another company in the world, and you're running Kaspersky, and Kaspersky detect it, you'll get all the goodness out of that. You'll know all the bad stuff about it, and your machine will be protected against the attack they've experienced. Passwords, this is a massive one. Change them often, make them complex, don't share them. You'd be surprised how many people, I'm sure some of you folks are pretty guilty of maybe sharing some of your passwords. And the thing is, once you share a password, you can't assure that it's never going to be used by some naughty person or it's not been shared. You have no clue. So try not to share them, store them in a safe location, make them as complex as you possibly can without forgetting them or without having to write them down. It's a balanced approach there. If you have a laptop or a mobile device, try to get it encrypted. There's a lot of free software out there, and I can advise you on as well, that you can kind of use to encrypt your hard drive. So one example is that I had from a friend was they'd rolled out hard drive encryption on all their laptops. The CEO, he was the CEO, went out to a bar with a bunch of mates, met with a bunch of customers, and just happened to leave his laptop there. It was after work. Eventually, thankfully they got the laptop back. But if you were to split that situation into two scenarios, one, if they didn't get the laptop back, they knew that no one could break into the laptop. It would be almost impossible to break into it to try to get any information out of it. If it wasn't encrypted, they could have just broken into the account and taken whatever information they wanted, and it'd be completely untraceable. So it's really, really important to kind of put these measures or these controls in place. Email security. So that example that you saw where we had Donald Trump message me, that was a spoofed email. You can knock those up in minutes. But a majority of small organizations will probably just get a lot of these spam phishing type emails, which, each one of those ones, if 1,000 is sent out and only one is clicked and one of the links happens to be malicious, that's it. That's the objective achieved for the bad guys. So there's something called DMARC that you can put in place, which kind of verifies the source and the domain of the email being sent. So it'll tell you if it's fake or if it's spoofed, and it'll stop it from coming into your mailbox, or it'll mark it spam instantly. I use that for myself, my company. Not many do. It's completely free. It can take you maybe a few hours to set up, and it's highly effective, and it's definitely recommended. Always keep your software and devices updated with the latest software patches. So I kind of showed you my phone earlier on. You get updates as soon as you get it, providing you've taken a backup. You'll get Windows updates if you use Windows 10 or 7 or whatever at the moment, and try to get into a routine of updating your software on a regular basis. Social media, this is an absolute massive one. You'd be surprised at how many people post stuff online that they're not meant to. They'll post their badge, they'll post some sensitive information without even thinking twice about it. You'll have a Christmas party in the office and someone's taking a selfie, and in the background, you've got a notice board with like that, the Wi-Fi password on it, or some other sensitive information you don't want to divulge. So just be a bit more aware of what you're sharing online, because once it's online, it's pretty much public and it'll be replicated in 1,000 sources within an hour. And it's pretty much impossible to remove that. One example that I've got is one of my friends used to work at a car manufacturer somewhere in the Midlands, and he was working on site. He was an IT support guy, and he's like, "Wow, this new X car," I was going to mention the name then, has come out. Is going to come out soon. It looks absolutely fantastic. Oh, let me take a photo of this. And he stuck it online, and obviously the corporate comms team found out, and they're like, "One of your guys has posted this online. We've got a multi-million-pound ad campaign going on. Like, please get him to remove it." So these kind of things can have a detrimental impact. Imagine if that was posted online and people are sharing it, and then the ad campaign just flops. Millions of pounds that were spent or put aside for the ad campaign suddenly became worthless, really. And it could impact, the delivery of that product. Enable multi-factor authentication for email and other services. So this is the same thing as what you use when you log on to your online banking. So if you HSBC, Barclays, or whatever, you'll get a separate card token reader. You type in your password, and this little token reader or whatever device it is will generate a second one-time password. So if you've got an option to do that, by all means do that. There's an app called Google Authenticator, which will generate these kind of keys for you. It's fairly simple to set up, but you know what? If someone has your password, they'll break into your account most likely. If you have multi-factor authentication enabled, even if they know your password, they need to actually have the token, and they might even need to have your phone if you have a token generator on there. So it does give you that additional layer of security, which is absolutely essential in this day and age. And the last bit is training your staff. Security awareness is extremely important. As I mentioned earlier, the security first approach is so essential nowadays. So just think twice about what you're doing. Try to explain to your employees that they play a vital part in cybersecurity. When we kind of talk about the weakest link in the chain, You could have, as I mentioned earlier, the most sophisticated cybersecurity platform and firewalls and all this kind of stuff. But it could just be one person that just doesn't follow the rules, or just doesn't know what they can and what they can't do, and that compromises the entire business. These things do happen, unfortunately. There was a massive, massive cybersecurity company, or is, in the States, and they do very, very expensive cybersecurity training. And one of their employees was like an admin clerk, and they happened to click on a phishing email, and that part of their infrastructure got compromised. How embarrassing is that? But it does happen. It does happen. So this is a cybersecurity company selling cybersecurity services that was affected by a cyber attack. So they managed to recover from it, but it just shows you no one is immune to these kind of things. So what I'm going to cover now is, if it comes up, yep, a lot of this can be set up at zero to little cost. So it doesn't have to cost the world. If you want to pay more money, by all means, you can do that. But some of the free and open source tooling and software, or stuff that's not as expensive, is very accessible. It's designed for small to medium enterprises or small to medium businesses. It doesn't take a lot of effort and time to install, and it pretty much gives you a well-rounded level of coverage, and to maintain and develop your cybersecurity posture. Now, the interesting stuff, the freebies. Everyone likes a free resource, and some of these link into what I've talked about. So the NCSC, which is the UK's National Cyber Security Centre, which is like the main point for all government and UK cybersecurity. They push a lot of articles, a lot of guidance. It's just really, really easy to understand. It's not highly technical, so anyone can pretty much pick it up. And they've got a small business guide, which I would really recommend you take a read about, and it's kind of defining pretty much everything that I've covered today, really, and it may be a bit more as well. They've also published the common cyber attacks. So some of the things I didn't touch into in too much detail in terms of the nitty gritty about malware types, Trojans, rootkits, and so on. This explains them fairly well. The Global Cyber Alliance, it's funded by private organizations, banks, and other security companies, but they provide a massive free resource, which is the Small Business Toolkit. And if you click on that link, that will take you to their Small Business Toolkit and have a bunch of different sections and guidance on what you can do. And it's very, very easily digestible, has a ton of information that you probably never thought about. And it will kind of really set you up to kind of cover all the areas of potential risk within your organization. Obviously, every organization is different, so you may have to adapt it accordingly, but it's a really, really good starting point for a lot of organizations. And hot off the press, yesterday, the Central London Police published Cyber Alarm, which is a free service that's going live, so you may have to register for it at the moment. Came out yesterday, it was actually publicized yesterday. And you can sign up your business, you install a small piece of software on one of your computers, and it basically, any kind of internet traffic which is dodgy or malicious or whatever, which doesn't look right, will be sent to a central location securely, and they'll identify and block that kind of traffic. So I think that's something I've just signed up for today, actually, and I'm kind of looking to kind of trial out and see how that works for me and myself. Email security, I kind of touched on that a bit earlier as well. Setting up DMARC, the Global Cyber Alliance has instructions on how to do that. As I mentioned, it's free. It'll give you a lot of worth and a lot of assurance to customers that you have a mechanism in place that will stop spoofing and phishing type attacks. DNS security, this is actually really cool. So when you access a website, for example, you type in google.com. Behind that is an IP address. It's a range of numbers, and it's very hard to remember telephone numbers, for example. So what they've done is they've got this system called the domain naming system, and what it does is it marries up the domain, like google.com, with the IP address. So instead of having to type in the IP address, you type in the domain, automatically does a lookup, and it tells you what the IP address, and your device eventually goes to that website. Whew, that's a simplified version. But what Quad 9 does, you can set it up on your phone. It's completely free. You can set it up on your computer, and that'll basically make sure all those little lookup requests for websites get verified. So if there's a dodgy website you're trying to access, it'll tell you, actually, that's probably not a good site to access. And it'll kind of act as another layer of security, protecting yourself, even your kids and your family, and even your business. And it's completely free, as I mentioned. Final thing is Cyber Essentials. Now, Cyber Essentials basically covers a minimum level of assurance. So you fill out a self-assessment questionnaire, you pay about £360, is the only thing that costs money. And it will basically give you a certificate, and it'll tell you your organization is meeting the common types of cyber attacks in terms of how it can defend against them. It's really worthwhile if you want to build trust. You get a badge. If you have a website, you can stick that on there as well. And it gets a lot of respect in the industry as well. And it kind of gives the customer confidence. Like how you'd see a padlock on an e-commerce site, gives you confidence, right? It's the same kind of thing with Cyber Essentials. It's developed in partnership with the NCSE, the National Cyber Security Centre, and UK government. And they're really pushing it out there. If you need any guidance and support on that, more than happy to help you out. So now to the Q&A section. Let's see what kind of questions we have. So, right, got one question. Okay. If your website is operational through companies like Squarespace, are they responsible for your cybersecurity? What I would recommend is two things. What your website is actually doing. If you've got an e-commerce site, or if you've got a blog, or if you've got anything that someone signs up to, I'd definitely recommend reading the terms and conditions. A lot of the terms and conditions these days are designed to be very easy to understand, and that will just tell you what kind of controls they put in place. So for Squarespace, for example, they may say that when you create a user account or a user creates an account on your website host on there, they'll encrypt all that information. They'll protect it. They'll use like the most advanced form of encryption. They'll make sure all that information is stored in like a central location, like the UK or US, wherever that is. But I would recommend definitely asking them what kind of security measures they have in place. So as I mentioned earlier, a lot of websites have DDoS protection, distributed denial of service, which stops them from getting a lot of flooded traffic and falling over, as I mentioned. So Squarespace may use a service such as Cloudflare to offer you that. You would never know about it. It's just built in. It's there to protect you. But I'd definitely ask them those types of questions. What kind of protections they've got in place? How are they protecting data for any customers or people that sign up to your website? Right. Thank you very much, Leslie. Next one is from Amina Chanda. She's asking, I don't have an address book on my emails. When I was hacked a few weeks ago, the hacker seemed to have sent emails to people I had no previous interaction with. What happened there? So this ties in very closely with something I dealt with not so long ago. So if you think of it like this, what they're doing is they've created an original malicious email. They've gone out there and they've found maybe your account, and they've found that they can compromise it with a password that might be known, or they've broken it, they've brute forced it. That's the technical term. They've taken over your account, and what they're doing there is they're looking through your address book on other victims. So what they'll do is they'll get that email and blow it out to those people, but also they might have done this previously, so they've got an extensive list of contacts they've been stealing and adding and distributing. So if you think of it this way, they're leapfrogging of every person's account they've compromised. So sometimes they might not even be sent to any of your contacts. They might just be random people or email addresses. And sometimes those other email addresses have an auto forward rule on them. So if they send it to xyz@gmail.com, which doesn't seem like it belongs to anyone, as soon as that email is received, it could just distribute it to 1,000 email addresses. So they use it almost like a springboard. That's the best way to think about it. Microsoft Enterprise 365. One question I would ask about that is if you have multi-factor authentication, if you are set up to have a PIN code on your phone in addition to your password, I'd recommend that. There was an incident that I dealt with previously where they used 365. They didn't have multi-factor authentication or two-factor authentication, and someone just identified their password, broke into their account, did something very similar. So I'd definitely recommend that. If you message me on the side, I'm more than happy to kind of guide you and support you on how we can kind of set that up. Keisha's asked a question: how to protect digital images and date if you use an external company software that you subscribe to. So I think you're probably asking that if you're using another platform for storing your images. You might be a photographer or something of that kind, and those images belong to you. Same thing goes. Ultimately, those companies you need to kind of consider: are they trusted? So millions and millions of people, including myself, trust Google. And for Google to get compromised would be a very, very big thing, and they've got like really hot security teams. But if you're using a smaller provider, I'll definitely kind of discuss with them in terms of what kind of security controls they have in place, and if they have a mechanism to kind of protect your data and how often they back it up as well. Some of these companies, especially the ones on a subscription basis, if you stop paying and say, I don't want to use that service any longer, they'll say, Thank you very much, Keisha. We're going to delete your data in 60 days or whatever their term is, and it's your responsibility to take that data off there. Or in some cases, they might say they might keep it. It's a free service, they might keep it perpetually. It's worth definitely engaging with them in some kind of dialogue and finding out what they're doing. If you want me to kind of do a bit more digging on that, please let me know what that service is. I can kind of do a bit more open source research and find out for you. Thank you feedback. Thank you for your feedback, Nina. There, Leslie's asked another question. We use Outlook for our email operation through GoDaddy. Can we install DMARC in it, or does GoDaddy Outlook have their own cybersecurity? You'd be surprised. I use GoDaddy for my website, and I also manage all my domain names through there. So if you've bought a domain through GoDaddy, or you manage it through GoDaddy, so if yours is leslie.com, you could go on there and you could set up your DMARC record. Through that, and that will literally work in any email system that is used to kind of send or receive your system. The Outlook is just an application that ties into your email account. So all the good stuff that we want to do for all DMARC will be set up in GoDaddy itself. I'd like to find out if your domains are actually managed in GoDaddy. I think that would give you a better idea. Thank you very much, Leslie. So Mohammed asked a question: how would you defend against cross-site scripting attack? So cross-site scripting is where if you have like an online form, so if you have a contact me form, you put your name and details inside, sometimes people can put in dodgy commands, and those commands can be used to like steal data and present it. So with cross-site scripting attacks, there's a number of different things you can do. You can do input sanitization. So what that means is in a name field, like Umar, where you type in your name as Umar, you would prevent anything else from actually being typed into that field. Just that actually, unfortunately, that's not accepted. So if someone's trying to insert or inject some kind of commands with like brackets and slashes and so on and so forth, it will reject those. You could also employ something called OWASP framework, which is, I believe, is the Online Web Application Security Project, which kind of gives you the 10 types of cyber attacks affecting websites and how you can try to build your site to protect against them. In addition to that, you might have something called a firewall, which kind of protects or monitors inbound traffic coming into your site and going out. Specifically, a web application firewall, and that is the same kind of thing. It's got a set of rules. If anything doesn't conform with those rules, any kind of requests or commands, they'll block them straight away. So that's something that you could kind of consider there, Mohammed. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mohammed. Keisha, thank you for your email. That's brilliant. Yeah, I can definitely provide you with the slides, not a problem at all. And Leslie, your domains are managed by GoDaddy Names Co. Yeah, absolutely. You can set up DMARC, not a problem at all. Oh yeah, this is a good one actually from an anonymous attendee. How do you build cyber insurance or governance procedures into a business plan, especially in a multilingual world? This is quite an interesting one because there's like a minimum requirement. You can't just have cyber insurance and expect it just to, pay out and kind of set you back up to normal. You have to put your best efforts into trying to protect and defend your organization. So when we're looking at like the governance procedures around what's in place, when you're looking at a business plan and you're talking about a multilingual world, so you probably have to kind of consider, where's your base of operations? Is it in the UK? So obviously UK law would be applicable there as well. If you're working in multi-territories, you probably have to work with a lawyer or a legal entity within that country to work out how that fit into your business. In terms of a business plan, when we're kind of looking at how the business is going to be, if it's not already started and it is developing or intends to develop very soon, it's kind of good to have that kind of process in place where you understand why you would need cyber insurance in the first place. So as I kind of touched on the planning, implementing and reviewing, just knowing why would you have cybersecurity insurance in place if you didn't store any data? It seems like, it might not be applicable to yourself. Whereby if you are storing a lot of customer data or you're an e-com company or you're a law firm, etc., that has a big implication. Then you have to kind of think about how do we protect that data? And then when we do go for an insurance package, how will that get us to an operable state again? Because it's like, the best example I can think of is like you've got a £10,000 motorbike, like a Ducati, and you take out a policy tomorrow which gives you insurance but only pays out £3,000. Not really beneficial, really. If it pays out £10,000 or more and depreciating over time, that does make sense. Does anybody have any more questions? I'm always around anyway, so if you have any kind of questions after the session, please either give me a call or drop me an email. I'm more than happy to help you out with that. I think there are any more questions. Radio. I just want to check to see if we haven't got any more questions. That's great. Firstly, thank you so much for taking your time out of your busy day today to come and talk to, well, sit through my presentation. I hope it wasn't boring. I hope it was insightful. And if you need any help, support, or guidance, don't call those guys, call me. I'm readily available, as I said. Please check out my website. And I'm sure some of you got questions around DMARC. Just so drop me an email and I can really try to explain those and make them a bit more easier for you to kind of put them in place. And if there's anything I can help with, as I mentioned before, give me a shout. Thank you so much for your time. I really, really appreciate it. And I hope to speak to you soon.